I just want to make a couple of comments on what Reggie and Frank had said earlier. First, with Reggie, I would echo Frank's position on Reggie that, as you heard, he has this combination of detailed knowledge about these policy issues with the detailed understanding of how the assembly works. That's really unparalleled to put those two together. So he is just a great representative there. And Frank, I would say, is not only a leading person on energy, but he really downplayed, I think, some of the courage that he's shown on transportation, because some people in his party have been hit very, very hard if they've come out and endorsed various forms of tax proposals for infrastructure and for transportation. And he has not only voted that way, as he said, but he's been very publicly visible in talking about the need to address Virginia's infrastructure issues, particularly with respect to transportation. So he really has been out front there, and I think you need to know that he's not just someone who's been in the background there, that he's been pretty courageous about where his position has been on those issues. And I was mentioning before, I have a little understanding of a couple of those issues. Some of those procurement notice issues that they talked about, the Virginia Press Association, for better or worse, I did their survey this year that they used in pushing that. But their concern essentially is that on procurement issues, what they want is to ensure that these things continue to be published in local newspapers. And the reason for that, they have an economic interest, is that so many of these community newspapers in Virginia, the weeklies, they're dependent on the publication of public notices, legal notices, and procurement notices there. And then secondly, what happened in the assembly session is the Association of General Contractors came in on the side of the Press Association, particularly those who wanted to ensure that at the local level, smaller contractors had the capacity to see what was available there on that second. Secondly, as Reggie mentioned, this Croson case, about 18 years ago, I wrote a book on it. And I'm probably one of the few people in America who has actually looked at how these things operated, because I went through the city of Richmond contracts during the period that they had this requirement in that there be 25% minority participation. And the outcome of that, the result, the interesting result, is that the purpose of this was to really broaden the number of groups and minorities that had access to city contracts. The outcome was that two companies received well over 50% of the city contracting that went to minorities. That it was essentially the two companies that the prime contractors felt they could rely on in any way got all of the money. And so the notion that there is some broad distribution of those dollars just didn't materialize in the research that we did after sitting in a warehouse in Richmond going through 2 or 3 years of contracts, seeing who got them and what happened at the end. There was really one firm that did site clearance and another firm that did various kinds of landscape architecture. They got almost all of the dollars in those programs. So on that front.
Good question on that.
Yeah.
Was that something that you were contracted by the city to do, or was that like a...
No, that was weren't contracted by the city, I can tell you. It was not a, that was a piece of scholarly research, just because we wanted to, there was all of this hoopla. This is good, this is bad, this is great, this is horrible. And we said, well, what actually happened? Right. Who worked? And there were certain things that we couldn't get into. We don't know, for example, if those companies then re-subcontracts back in some ways. But what we did know is that essentially what happened is that, and we had some interviews where a couple of political leaders said things like, well, we were just hoping to create a few millionaires on that front, because we would confront them or bring to them this evidence, and they would say, yeah, well, that's how it works, but, It used to work the other way, now we're getting our share in some fashion on that front. But it was a pretty interesting study that way of what happened, is that it was very difficult to think that you would distribute the money that widely, as some people argued, and really it went, as I said, to two companies, got well over 50% of all of the monies that went during that period to minority sub-firms on that front. Now, I don't know if that would be the case today, 15, 18, 20 years later, but that was certainly the case when the Croson case came up.